Across the drought-ravaged plains of Nebraska, where hope withers like unwatered crops, fate is about to turn the soil of destiny. Through howling winds and stinging dust, a lone farmer spots something impossible. A woman in evening wear, stumbling through his dying cornfield. His calloused hands, used to coaxing life from barren earth, now pull her to safety in his weathered barn. She vanishes with the storm, leaving only questions behind. But when military helicopters suddenly darken his sky 2 days later, his simple act of kindness proves to be the seeds of something extraordinary. Could this mysterious woman be the miracle his failing farm needs? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The red envelope sat unopened on Jake Miller's kitchen table, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the worn wooden surface beneath. He knew what it contained, the same warning he'd received every month for the past year. His weathered fingers traced the bank's embossed logo as morning light filtered through dust-streaked windows, casting long shadows across the farmhouse kitchen his grandfather had built in 1932. Outside, the irrigation system groaned to life, its ancient gears protesting another day of futile labor. Jake took a long sip of black coffee, bitter and strong, just like the choices facing him. At 52, he was the last miller still working this land, and maybe the last fool in Butler County who hadn't sold out to the corporate farms. The envelope could wait. He had chores to do. In the pre-dawn quiet, Jake's boots crunched across parched earth that should have been thick with corn by now. August used to paint these fields golden, but this year's crop was withering before it had a chance to mature. His practiced eye noted every struggling stalk, each one a reminder of the gamble he took by planting at all. Sarah would have known what to do. His late wife had always been the practical one, keeping the books balanced even in lean years. The thought of her brought a familiar ache, but also a ghost of a smile. She'd been gone 5 years now, but sometimes he still caught himself turning to share a sunset with her or ask her opinion about the weather. "What would you make of this mess, old girl?" he murmured, reaching the barn where generations of millers had stored their harvests. The massive structure stood like a sentinel against the pale morning sky, its red paint faded to a dusty rose. Inside, the space echoed with emptiness where grain should have been piled high. His phone buzzed, probably Tom Watson from the bank again. Jake let it go to voicemail. He'd heard the speech enough times, restructuring options, generous buyout offers, the importance of facing reality. Reality was all Jake had faced for the past 3 years of drought. Reality was watching neighbors pack up generations of history into moving trucks. Reality was the letter he'd received from his son Michael last month, suggesting he consider his options before things got worse. The morning news droned from the ancient radio mounted near his workbench. Continuing drought conditions across the state, with agricultural experts predicting crop yields could fall to historic lows. In related news, AgriCorp announced another expansion of their automated farming operations. Jake switched it off with more force than necessary. He didn't need experts to tell him what his bones already knew. This drought was different. It had sunk deeper into the earth than any he'd weathered before, turning the rich Nebraska soil to dust that waited for the slightest wind to take flight. At the far end of the barn, he paused before the wall of photos that chronicled his family's history with the land. His grandfather stood proud in the earliest image, taken just after he'd purchased the property. Next to it, Jake's father posed with his first successful harvest in 1965. Jake himself appeared in dozens of shots, as a toddler on his father's shoulders, a teenager learning to drive the tractor, a young man standing beside Sarah on their wedding day. The most recent photo showed Michael's graduation from business school in Chicago. His son's smile was confident, his suit sharp, a world away from the dusty jeans and calloused hands that had put him through college. Jake hadn't taken any new pictures since Sarah passed. Somehow, it felt like the story had stopped with her. The distant rumble of engines drew his attention outside. Through the barn's wide doors, he watched as a convoy of trucks rolled past his property line. They were headed to the Henderson place 2 miles down. Old Bill had finally given in last week, accepting AgriCorp's offer after 58 years of independence. The trucks would bring their automated systems, their soil sensors, their armies of drones, everything modern farming was supposed to be. Jake's hand found the letter in his pocket, crumpling it slightly. The bank's deadline loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. 3 months to make good on his payments, or they'd be forced to explore alternative arrangements. The polite term for foreclosure. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to change course. She'd said that during the flood of '98, when they'd lost half their equipment and had to completely rethink their planting strategy. They'd survived then by adapting, by being willing to try new methods. But this felt different. This wasn't about changing methods. It was about changing everything. The corporations weren't interested in farmers, just farms. They'd replace his careful stewardship with algorithms, his morning inspections with satellite imagery. They'd tear down the old barn, probably, and with it the last physical connection to his grandfather's dreams. A dry wind picked up, carrying the promise of another scorching day. Jake straightened his shoulders and headed for the tractor. The last miller or not, he had work to do. The earth might be stubborn, but he was more so. His father used to say that farmers had to be part prophet and part gambler, betting everything on the promise of rain and the mercy of markets. Looking east, where the sun was burning away the morning haze, Jake made his own quiet prophecy. He'd find a way through this, or he'd go down trying. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds looked impossible. The land had taught him that much, at least. The old tractor coughed to life beneath him, its familiar vibrations running through his bones like a heartbeat. Above, the sky stretched vast and empty, holding its rain like a miser hoarding gold. But Jake Miller drove on, keeping his eyes on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered in the distance. Whether they brought destruction or salvation remained to be seen. The weather-beaten family Bible lay open on Jake's kitchen table, its pages yellow with age. Between Genesis and Exodus, 5 generations of millers had recorded their histories in fading ink. Births, deaths, marriages, and always, always notes. About the weather, Jake's fingers traced his grandfather's neat script from the Dust Bowl years. 1934. No rain for 240 days. Lord, give us strength. The emergency weather radio crackled with static, interrupting his reflections. May severe storm warning for Butler County. Conditions reminiscent of the 2024 dust storm system. All residents advised to secure properties and prepare for potential zero visibility conditions. Jake closed the Bible carefully, adding his own entry in the margins. 2025 storm coming, worse than usual. He didn't elaborate. Some things you had to live through to understand. The morning's clear skies had turned ominous, a strange yellow-gray color that old-timers called tornado light. But this wasn't tornado weather. The air was too dry, too still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Through the kitchen window, Jake watched his wind turbine spinning faster than it had in months, the first warning sign of what was coming. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Saw the weather alert. You should come to Chicago until it passes. Jake stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. His son meant well, but he didn't understand. You couldn't just abandon a farm to the mercy of a storm. Everything he had left was here. Instead of responding, Jake walked to the mudroom and began gathering supplies. Flashlights, batteries, his emergency radio, bottles of water. The ritual was as familiar as morning coffee. Every farmer worth his salt kept a storm kit ready, especially these days when the weather seemed to swing between extremes like a pendulum gone mad. The barn needed securing first. Jake stepped outside, immediately tasting dust in the air. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the acidic scent of rain that would never fall. His great-uncle Walter had written about that smell in the Bible. 2. The cruel joke of drought is how it promises rain right before it tries to bury you in dust. He worked methodically, checking the barn doors, reinforcing the weather stripping, making sure every piece of equipment was under cover. The old structure had weathered countless storms, but Jake never took chances. Sarah had taught him that. Plan for the worst, pray for the best, and keep moving either way. A shadow passed overhead, and for a moment, Jake thought the storm had arrived early, but it was just a drone, probably one of AgriCorp's survey units checking their neighboring properties. The sight made his jaw tighten. Even the sky wasn't private anymore. Back in the house, Jake filled his bathtub and every spare container with water. The well pump was electric, and storms like this had a way of knocking out power. His grandfather's voice echoed from countless childhood storms. Water and wisdom, boy. You can survive anything if you have enough of both. The wind suddenly shifted, bringing a blast of cold air from the north. Jake paused at the window, watching his struggling cornstalks bend almost double. The crops weren't ready for this, but nothing ever really was. Nature kept its own counsel, indifferent to human schedules and needs. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated alert from the bank, reminding him of their pending discussion about asset management. Jake smiled grimly. Let them worry about assets. He had a storm to survive first. The Bible had fallen open again when he returned to the kitchen, this time to a page of Sarah's handwriting. She'd recorded the day of their worst storm back in 2020. Wind took the west fence and half our topsoil. Jake stood in the doorway all night, watching over everything like some kind of lonely guardian angel. He forgets sometimes that you can't fight the weather. You can only prepare, endure, and rebuild. The memory hit him like a physical thing. Sarah had brought him coffee that night, standing beside him in comfortable silence as the storm raged. She'd understood his need to witness, to face whatever came. It was the farmer in him, she'd said, this stubborn insistence on meeting nature's challenges head-on. Outside, the first real gusts began to hit, carrying sheets of dust that reduced visibility to a few hundred yards. Jake checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Early for a storm like this to build. Usually they came at dusk as if the dying light gave them strength. This one was different, hungry, eager. The radio updated its warning. Conditions deteriorating rapidly. All residents strongly advised to seek shelter immediately. Wind gusts exceeding 60 miles per hour reported. Jake made one final check of the house's seals, windows, doors, even the old chimney flue. Dust had a way of finding any weakness, any gap in your defenses. The last thing he needed was to spend a week cleaning soil out of every corner of the house. The sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise. Jake stood at his front window, watching the world disappear behind waves of flying dirt. The scene could have been from any time in the last 100 years. The same battle between man and nature that his family had been fighting since they first broke ground here. He thought about Michael's text, about the offer of shelter in Chicago. His son had escaped all this, built a life where success wasn't measured in rainfall and crop yields. Sometimes, in his darkest moments, Jake wondered if that hadn't been the smarter path. But as the storm began its assault in earnest, Jake knew he was exactly where he needed to be. This land was more than property. It was his heritage, his responsibility, his home. He'd ride out this storm just as his ancestors had ridden out theirs, keeping watch over what remained of the Miller legacy. The lights flickered once, twice, then held. Jake settled into his father's old recliner, the family Bible in his lap, and prepared for a long night. He didn't know then that this storm would bring more than just dust and wind. Didn't know that fate had finally decided to answer all those prayers written in the margins of Genesis. The storm hit like a freight train at dusk. Visibility dropped to nothing as walls of dirt and debris battered the farmhouse. Jake had weathered hundreds of storms, but the raw power of this one made him pause. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed, as if the prairie itself was giving voice to 3 years of drought and desperation. Power flickered and died at 8:42 p.m. Jake clicked on his emergency lantern, its beam catching dust motes that had somehow found their way inside. The radio, now running on batteries, continued its litany of warnings. Remain indoors. Multiple vehicles reported stranded on County Road 27. Emergency services suspended until conditions improve. A sound caught his attention. Something different from the storm's constant roar. Jake pressed his face to the window, squinting through the maelstrom. There, in the dying cornfield, a flash of movement. He blinked. Sure, his eyes were playing tricks. But there it was again. A pale shape struggling against the wind. Lord Almighty, Jake breathed, already reaching for his coat and goggles. The shape resolved itself into something impossible. A person, wearing what looked like a light-colored dress, fighting their way through his withered cornstalks. Jake didn't hesitate. He'd grown up hearing stories of farmers who died trying to rescue stranded travelers in dust storms. But he'd also been raised to believe that a man's character showed in how he acted when no one was watching. He strapped on his emergency kit, wrapped a bandana around his face, and stepped into chaos. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Dust stung any exposed skin, and his powerful flashlight barely penetrated the murk. Jake oriented himself using the barn as a reference point, then began moving toward where he'd last seen the figure. Each step was a battle against nature's fury. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the storm. "This way! Follow my light!" For a terrifying moment there was nothing but swirling darkness. Then his light caught something reflective, sequins on fabric, he'd later realize. The figure had fallen to their knees, one arm raised against the assault of wind and dirt. Jake reached them in 3 long strides. It was a woman, dressed for an evening event rather than an apocalyptic storm. Her cocktail dress, once probably elegant, was now caked with dirt. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, trying to speak but coughing instead. Without words, Jake helped her to her feet. She'd lost one of her shoes, a designer heel that looked like it cost more than his monthly fuel budget. The other she kicked off as they began their struggle back to the barn. It was closer than the house, and right now, seconds counted. They moved as one unit, Jake's body shielding her from the worst of the wind. He could feel her shaking, whether from cold or fear or both. The barn's bulk emerged from the gloom like a ship through fog, and Jake nearly cried with relief when his hand found the side door. Inside, the storm's roar became a distant thing. Jake's flashlight revealed a face streaked with dirt and tears, dark hair wild from the wind. The woman collapsed onto a hay bale, coughing up dust. He quickly dug through his emergency kit for water and a clean cloth. "Small sips," he advised, helping her hold the bottle. "Too much at once will make you sick." His other hand was already reaching for the first aid kit. Her arms were scratched from the corn stalks, and a nasty cut on her leg was beginning to swell. "Thank you," she managed between coughs. Her voice was rough but carried an educated accent, East Coast maybe, or European. "I was sure." "You're safe now," Jake said, falling into the gentle tone he used to use when Michael had nightmares. "I'm Jake Miller. This is my farm. Can you tell me your name?" She took another sip of water, seeming to gather herself. "Catherine," she said finally. "Catherine Whitmore. My car. The storm came so suddenly. GPS stopped working. I pulled over, but then it felt like the car was moving, sliding somehow." Jake nodded. He'd seen it before. Cars getting pushed by these winds, especially the lighter modern ones. "County Road 27, he asked, remembering the radio warning. When she nodded, he did some quick mental geography. "That's nearly 2 miles from here. You walked all that way in this." "Walked, crawled, got blown." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I saw your wind turbine above the corn. Figured where there was power, there might be people." She looked down at her ruined dress and laughed. A surprisingly warm sound in the storm-rattled barn. I had a dinner meeting in Omaha. Thought I'd take the scenic route back. Stupid. Jake cleaned and bandaged her cuts as she talked, noting how she tried not to wince. Tough lady, under the fancy clothes. Once he was satisfied she wasn't seriously injured, he stood and turned on his battery-powered lamp, pushing back the darkness. "Power's out in the house," he explained, "but I've got a generator here in the barn. Not much, but it'll keep us warm and give us some light until this passes." He paused, studying the walls that shuddered with each gust. "Could be hours, though. You okay waiting it out here?" Catherine nodded, pulling his offered blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't suppose you get many evening wear-clad visitors dropping by during dust storms?" "You'd be the first," Jake admitted. "Though we did have a traveling salesman wait out a tornado in our root cellar back in '98. Fellow ended up staying 3 days and sold my wife a complete set of encyclopedias we didn't need." That earned another laugh, one that turned into a yawn. The adrenaline was wearing off, Jake realized. He'd seen it before, the crash that comes after survival when your body finally processes what it's been through. "Try to rest," he said, settling onto a nearby bale. "I'll keep watch." He didn't mention that he always kept watch during storms, a habit Sarah had lovingly teased him about. Some things you didn't explain to strangers, no matter how unusual. The circumstances of their arrival. Catherine's eyes were already closing, but she fought it for one more moment. "Your wife. Will she mind me being here?" "She passed," Jake said quietly. 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Catherine murmured, and something in her tone made Jake think she really was. Then exhaustion won, and her breathing deepened. Into sleep, Jake watched over her and the storm, his mind turning over the strange circumstances that had brought them both to this moment. In his pocket, he could feel the edge of the bank's warning letter crinkling with each movement. Tomorrow would bring its own problems, its own battles with nature and economics. But for now, he had done what farmers had always done, offered shelter from the storm, no questions asked. Outside, the wind continued its assault, and somewhere in his ruined fields lay an expensive high heel, already being buried by the relentless dust. Jake settled in for a long night, unaware that this storm would prove to be the dividing line between everything he had known and everything that was coming. The night stretched long, punctuated by the storm's fury and the gentle creak of the barn's timbers. Jake kept his vigil, watching both his mysterious guest and the weather. Catherine slept fitfully, occasionally muttering something about meetings and deadlines. Even in sleep, she carried herself with a kind of dignity that seemed out of place among the hay bales and rusty farm equipment. Around midnight, the generator sputtered, and Jake had to venture into the howling dark to refuel it. When he returned, he found Catherine awake, studying an old photograph he kept pinned to the barn wall, his father teaching him to drive the tractor, circa 1985. "How many generations?" she asked, not turning around. "4, counting me," Jake replied, brushing dust from his clothes. "My grandfather bought this place in '32, right in the teeth of the Depression. Everyone thought he was crazy, starting a farm when so many were failing. And was he? Crazy?" There was something careful in her tone, like she was asking about more than just his grandfather. Jake considered the question as he checked the generator's connections. "Crazy enough to believe in something bigger than himself, I suppose. He used to say a farm isn't just land, it's a promise you make to the future." Catherine turned then, her face thoughtful in the lamplight. The rest had brought some color back to her cheeks, though her designer dress still looked absurdly out of place. "That's beautiful," she said. "But what happens when the future changes course, when the promise becomes unsustainable?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Jake busied himself adjusting the lamp, buying time to respond. "You sound like someone who knows something about farming." "I know about business," she said, her voice taking on a professional edge, "and about adapting to survive. Sometimes holding on too tight to tradition can—" She stopped abruptly as if catching Herself. I'm sorry. That's presumptuous of me, especially after you've been so kind. Jake waved off the apology. Nothing presumptuous about honest words. Lord knows I've had plenty of people telling me I'm fighting a losing battle out here. He managed a smile, though usually they're wearing work boots, not cocktail dresses. That drew a laugh from her, a rich sound that seemed to push back the storm's darkness. Yes, well, this isn't exactly how I plan to spend my evening. I had a rather important dinner meeting in Omaha. Agricultural investment opportunities, actually. Let me guess, Agricorp. The words came out sharper than he'd intended. Catherine's slight hesitation was answer enough. You know them? Hard not to these days. They've bought up half the county. Jake kept his voice neutral, though the memory of Bill Henderson's truck still rankled. Automated farming, drone supervision, soil sensors, everything modern and efficient and profitable, Catherine added softly. The old ways, they're struggling to compete. Surely you've seen that. Jake had moved to check the barn doors, but now he turned back to her. There was something in her voice, not condescension, but genuine concern. I've seen a lot of things, Ms. Whitmore. Seen farmers who worked their whole lives reduced to pressing buttons on a computer. Seen communities die when the human touch was replaced by algorithms. She stood, wrapping his blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. But you've also seen 3 years of drought, seen climate patterns shifting, markets changing. The world doesn't stop moving just because we wish it would. No, Jake agreed, surprising himself with his calm. But maybe there's value in having someone who remembers what the land feels like under their feet, someone who knows every dip and hollow, every place where water gathers or soil needs extra care. He gestured to the darkness outside. Can't program that into a drone. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made him want to check if he had hay in his hair. Finally, she said, "Tell me about your farm, Mr. Miller. Not the problems. I can guess those. Tell me about what makes it special." So he did. For the next 2 hours, as the storm raged outside, Jake found himself opening up to this elegant stranger about everything. The spring-fed pond that never failed, even in drought. The high corner where his grandfather had planted apple trees, that still bore fruit. The way the sunrise looked different from every field, like the land had its own way of greeting the day. Catherine listened with surprising attention, asking sharp questions about soil composition, water management, and crop rotation. There was clearly a keen mind behind her polished exterior, and Jake found himself drawn into detailed discussions of farming techniques he hadn't talked about since Sarah passed. As the night wore on, they shared his thermos of coffee and swapped stories. She told him about growing up in Boston, about business school and corporate boardrooms. He spoke about raising Michael, about the joy and heartbreak of working land that could be both generous and cruel. The storm began to ease around dawn, its fury spending itself in fitful gusts. Catherine had dozed off again, this time with a peaceful expression that made her look younger, less guarded. Jake stepped outside to check the damage, unsurprised, to find his fields scoured by wind and dirt. They'd survived worse. When he returned to the barn, Catherine was gone. In her place was a handwritten note, penned on what looked like expensive stationery. "Dear Mr. Miller, thank you for your kindness, your stories, and most of all, your perspective. You've given me much to think about. Perhaps the future doesn't always have to come at the expense of the past. With gratitude, Catherine Whitmore, P.S. About that spring-fed pond. Have you ever considered its potential for sustainable irrigation?" Jake read the note twice, wondering if he'd imagined the entire night. But there was the blanket she'd used, still holding a trace of unfamiliar perfume, and there in the corner a business card had fallen from her ruined dress. He picked it up, then nearly dropped it when he read the embossed title beneath her name, CEO, Agrotech Solutions International. The morning sun broke through the barn's high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors began to beat against the dawn sky. Jake Miller stood in his barn doorway, holding an elegant handwritten Note from one of the most powerful women in modern agriculture, and wondered what kind of storm had really just blown through his life. The Butler County Gazette lay folded on the counter at May's diner, its headline stark against the coffee stains. Record dust storm leaves path of destruction. Agricultural leaders call for modern solutions. Below the fold, a smaller headline caught Jake's eye. Agrotech CEO missing during storm, search called off. Quite a night, wasn't it? May herself topped off Jake's coffee, her weathered face creased with concern. Bill Henderson said his weather station measured gusts up to 80 miles per hour. Haven't seen anything like that since 98, Jake finished, his eyes still on the paper. The article mentioned Catherine Whitmore's last known location as County Road 27, but made no reference to her eventual fate. He found himself oddly reluctant to share what he knew. "You get any damage out your way?" May asked, sliding a piece of apple pie in front of him. On the house, her expression said, the diner had been doing that a lot lately for struggling farmers. "Nothing I can't handle." Jake took a bite of pie, remembering how Catherine had asked almost the same question about his grandfather's sanity. The memory felt strange now, knowing who she really was. The diner's bell chimed as Earl Watson walked in, shaking dust from his coat. The bank manager's son gave Jake a long look before settling at the far end of the counter. Word had obviously spread about the missed mortgage payment. "Did you hear about that missing executive?" May lowered her voice, leaning closer. "Private helicopter's been buzzing around all morning. Frank swears he saw men in suits out by the highway, corporate types." Jake nodded non-committally, focusing on his pie. The helicopter had passed over his property twice already, but he'd stayed in the barn, methodically cleaning storm debris. The note in his pocket felt heavier with each passing hour. "Shame about her car," old Pete contributed from his usual corner booth. "They found it half buried in dirt off 27. Nice vehicle. One of them hybrid luxury models." He shook his head. "Ain't natural if you ask me. Cars should run on good old-fashioned gas." The diner's regular crowd murmured agreement. Jake listened to their familiar voices debate everything from vehicle preferences to corporate farming. Their conversation a comfortable dance around the real issues facing their community. Nobody wanted to talk about the foreclosure notices, the failing crops, the slow death of a way of life. His phone buzzed. Another text from Michael. "Saw the storm on the news. You okay?" Jake typed back a quick affirmative, leaving out any mention of unexpected guests. His son had enough ammunition for his sell the farm arguments, without adding mysterious CEO encounters to the mix. The television mounted above the counter switched to a breaking news report. Jake looked up to see Catherine's professional headshot filling the screen. She looked different there, polished, powerful, every inch the corporate executive. The woman he'd shared coffee with in his barn had been something else entirely. Sources say Ms. Whitmore was conducting a series of meetings with agricultural investment firms in the region. Her company, Agrotech Solutions International, has been at the forefront of modernizing farming practices. "That's all we need," Earl muttered from his end of the counter. "Another suit, telling us how to run our farms." Jake stood, leaving payment for his coffee under the cup. The pie he'd have to repay May some other way. Outside, the morning sun illuminated a changed landscape. Dust covered everything, smoothing the world's edges like fresh snow. His truck was barely visible under its new coat of dirt. The helicopter's distant thrum drew his attention skyward. They were searching in the wrong direction, but he wasn't sure he was ready to tell them that. Catherine's note had hinted at something, a possibility he wasn't quite ready to share with a world that seemed determined to erase everything he cared about. He drove home slowly, his mind on the spring-fed pond and Catherine's curious postscript. The old miller's stubbornness was warring with something else now, a spark of an idea that felt dangerous and hopeful all at once. Behind him, the helicopter continued its futile search pattern, unaware that its quarry had already found what she was looking for. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades shattered the morning quiet. Jake was checking his irrigation lines when three sleek black choppers appeared over the eastern tree line, their approach deliberate and purposeful. This wasn't another search. Pattern. They knew exactly where they were going. He straightened slowly, shielding his eyes against the sun, as the lead helicopter descended into his south field. The other two held their position overhead, rotors stirring up small dust devils from the drought-parched earth. The whole scene felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than his quiet corner of Butler County. The lead chopper's door opened before its skids fully touched down. Catherine emerged first, transformed from the storm-battered stranger he'd sheltered. She wore a crisp navy suit now, her dark hair perfectly styled, an ID badge glinting at her lapel. Catherine Whitmore, CEO, Agrotech Solutions International. Behind her came a team of people carrying tablets and equipment, their movements precise and practiced. Jake waited by his truck, suddenly conscious of his dusty work clothes and mud-caked boots. Catherine spotted him and started walking over, her expression unreadable. The contrast between this powerful executive and the vulnerable woman who'd slept in his barn couldn't have been starker. "Mr. Miller!" she called as she approached, her voice carrying over the dying rotor wash. Then softer as she drew closer, "Jake." "Ms. Whitmore." He nodded, keeping his voice neutral. Quite an entrance. A hint of the woman he'd met during the storm showed in her slight smile. "I thought about just driving up, but apparently my board of directors gets nervous when their CEO disappears in a dust storm." She glanced back at her hovering escort. "They've been concerned. Suppose finding their boss in a broken-down barn wouldn't have helped much." "That broken-down barn saved my life." Catherine's tone was gentle but firm. "And our conversation. That night, it gave me an idea. Several ideas, actually." She turned to gesture at one of her team members, who hurried forward with a tablet. "I'd like to show you something, if you're willing to look." Jake studied her for a moment. The morning sun caught the holographic security features on her ID badge, making the Agrotech logo shimmer. That same logo was on the trucks that had hauled away Bill Henderson's legacy. "Why here?" he asked finally. "Of all the farms in all. The storms? Maybe it wasn't chance." Catherine took the tablet, but didn't immediately hand it over. "That pond you told me about, the spring-fed one. I had our satellite team look at it. The aquifer readings are extraordinary, and your soil composition, despite the drought, you've managed to maintain it better than farms with twice your resources. Just doing what my father taught me." "Exactly." Catherine's eyes lit up. "That's what I've been trying to tell my board. We've been so focused on replacing traditional farming that we've ignored centuries of accumulated knowledge. But what if we could combine both? Your understanding of the land with our technology." Jake felt a familiar resistance rising. "Ma'am, if this is leading to a buyout offer..." "It's not." She held up a hand. "It's a partnership proposal. Your farm would become a pilot program for a new hybrid approach. You'd maintain operational control, but with access to our resources and technology, a bridge between the old ways and the new." The helicopter blades continued their steady beat overhead, like a mechanical heartbeat counting the seconds. Jake looked past Catherine at his fields, at the farm that had shaped 4 generations of his family. "And if it doesn't work, then you'll still own your land, with improvements paid for by Agrotech." She smiled. "I'm not always the corporate shark people expect, Jake. Sometimes I'm just a woman who got lost in a storm and found something she didn't know she was looking for." She held out the tablet. On its screen, Jake could see detailed analyses of his property overlaid with proposed improvements that somehow didn't look as alien as he'd feared. The spring-fed pond featured prominently in the plans, its potential finally recognized. "I'll need time to think about it," he said, not taking the tablet yet. Catherine nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. But think about this too. Your grandfather didn't just buy this land to farm it. He bought it to build something that would last. Maybe this is how it survives into the next generation." She stepped back, professional mask sliding back into place as her team gathered around her. But just before turning to leave, she paused. "Oh, and Jake, I never did find my other shoe. The comment startled a laugh from him. Probably halfway to Kansas by now. Keep an eye out for it, she called over her shoulder. I paid entirely too much for those heels. Jake watched the helicopters lift off, their synchronized departure as choreographed as their arrival. The ID badge's hologram had caught the sun one last time before Catherine boarded, throwing rainbow patterns across his dusty boots. Like everything else about this morning, it felt like a sign. He just wasn't sure of what yet. The old leather-bound ledger creaked as Jake opened it, releasing the musty scent of decades of careful record-keeping. His father's precise handwriting filled the early pages, giving way to Sarah's neat columns, and finally his own rougher script. Every crop, every expense, every triumph and failure, all documented in fading ink and faithful pencil marks. He'd been studying these books for hours, searching for, what? Permission? Wisdom? Some sign from the past that he wasn't betraying everything his family had built by even considering Catherine's offer. His phone buzzed. Catherine's number. He'd saved it after she'd left it with the proposal documents. Just checking. If you've had a chance to review the materials, her text read. Then, a moment later, the board meets next week. No pressure, but there was pressure. There was always pressure. Jake set the phone down and returned to the ledger. The entry from his father's last harvest caught his eye. Remember, a farmer's pride means nothing to a hungry world. Do what needs doing. A knock at the screen door interrupted his thoughts. Earl Watson stood on the porch, manila envelope in hand. The bank manager's expression was professionally sympathetic. "Jake, we need to talk." Jake let him in, offering coffee more out of habit than hospitality. Earl settled at the kitchen table, his eyes catching on the scattered proposal documents from Agrotech. "So the rumors are true," he said quietly. "Depends on the rumor." Jake remained standing, one hand resting on the old ledger. "Word is, Catherine Whitmore herself offered you some kind of deal." Earl leaned forward. "Jake, you know I've got to proceed with the foreclosure process unless something changes. If Agrotech's offering a way out..." "It's not a buyout," Jake said sharply. "It's a partnership. They want to use the farm as a test case, combining traditional methods with their technology." Earl's eyebrows rose. "And you're considering it?" The question stung more than it should have. "Sarah always said I was too stubborn for my own." "Good. Maybe she was right. Your wife was a smart woman." Earl's voice softened. "Look, Jake, I know what this place means to you. My daddy sold tractors to your daddy. But times change. Even Bill Henderson..." "I'm not Bill," Jake cut in. "And this isn't about selling out. It's about..." He trailed off, looking through the window at the fields his grandfather had first plowed. "It's about finding a way forward." Earl nodded, slowly, setting the envelope aside. "For what it's worth, I hope it works out. The county's not the same without millers working this land." After Earl left, Jake returned to the ledger. Behind the recent years of struggling numbers, he found an entry from 1998, written in Sarah's hand. "New irrigation system installed. Jake fought it every step, but the crops don't seem to mind. Sometimes love means dragging a stubborn man in two. The future." He picked up his phone, staring at Catherine's message. The cursor blinked expectantly as he typed, "Can we meet? Need to discuss some terms." Her reply came quickly. "Name the time and place. No helicopters this time, I promise." Jake smiled despite himself. "May's Diner, 7 a.m. tomorrow. They make decent coffee. Better than storm shelter coffee in a thermos." "Not hardly, but the pie's worth the trip." He set the phone down and ran his fingers over the ledger's worn pages. 4 generations of millers had written their stories here. Maybe it was time to start a new chapter. The sun was setting, painting the drought-stressed corn in shades of gold and promise. Jake stood in his doorway, thinking about his grandfather. Buying this land when everyone said he was crazy. About his father installing the first mechanical irrigation. About Sarah pushing him to try new seed varieties. None of them had simply accepted what was. They'd all found ways to adapt, to move forward while holding on to what mattered. The ledger wasn't just a record of crops and weather. It was a testament to change itself, to the constant dance between tradition and progress. Tomorrow, he'd meet Catherine and work out the details. There would be terms to negotiate, boundaries to set. But tonight, he had chores to do. The land didn't care about corporate partnerships or modern technology. It only knew the touch of those who worked it, who understood its rhythms and needs. Jake closed the ledger carefully, adding his own entry at the bottom of the page. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to build a different future. The soil analysis report glowed on the tablet screen, its graphs and charts telling a story Jake's hands had known for years. Exceptional microbial diversity in sectors 3 and 4, the agrotech scientist explained, her excitement barely contained. Your crop rotation methods have maintained soil health far beyond expectations, especially given the drought conditions. Catherine stood beside him in the field, both of them watching the team work. They made an odd pair, her in business casual that somehow stayed pristine, him in his usual work clothes. But over the past week they'd found a rhythm, a way of bridging their different worlds. Your grandfather's apple trees, Catherine said, gesturing to the report. The soil samples there are remarkable. The root systems have created a natural water retention network that's been supporting the surrounding areas. Been trying to tell folks that for years. Jake couldn't quite keep the satisfaction from his voice. Some things you learn from books, others from watching and waiting. That's exactly what we need to document. Catherine's eyes lit up the way they did when she was building on an idea. The report shows what's working, but you know why it's working. Together, we can create a model that combines generations of practical knowledge with modern analysis. The morning sun caught the new soil sensors being installed across his fields, their sleek forms incongruous among the weathered fence posts. Each one would transmit real-time data about moisture levels, mineral content, and a dozen other metrics Jake was still learning about. Michael called last night, Jake said, watching another sensor being placed. First time in months, words gotten out about our arrangement. Catherine turned to study his expression. And he's coming home this weekend. Says he wants to understand what's happening. Jake managed a small smile. Guess corporate partnerships are more interesting than foreclosure notices. Would you like me to be here when he visits? The offer was casual, but Jake heard the underlying concern. Might help, he admitted. You speak his language better than I do, all those business terms that make my head spin. A gentle breeze carried the smell of turned earth from where the installation team worked. The soil report had recommended specific depths for the sensors, but Jake had adjusted several locations based on his knowledge of the land's contours. It was the first real test of their partnership, his experience working alongside their technology. Look at this, Catherine said, scrolling through the report. The moisture retention patterns match almost exactly with what you predicted. The sensors are confirming what you already knew. Jake nodded, remembering countless mornings walking these fields, learning their secrets through boot leather and patience. Difference is, now we can prove it, show others how to do the same. That's the goal. Catherine paused, then added, softly, you know, when I got lost in that storm, I thought I knew everything about modern farming, all our data, our projections, but I'd never felt soil crumble between my fingers, never understood what it meant to read the land itself. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the quiet beeping of sensors coming online. The tablet displayed a real-time map of his property, colored overlays showing the complex interplay of soil conditions. It was his farm translated into their language, but somehow it didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. Sarah would have loved all this, Jake said suddenly. She was always pushing me to try new things, learn new ways. He gestured at the tablet. She'd probably understand. These charts better than I do. Catherine's hand touched his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding. Tell me about her, if you want to. So he did, standing there in the morning sun, describing Sarah's determination to modernize their bookkeeping, her experiments with different cover crops, her belief that loving the land meant being willing to change with it. The installation team worked on, their sensors slowly building a digital mirror of the farm's hidden life. The soil analysis report continued to update, each new data point confirming what generations of millers had learned through experience. But now, those lessons could be shared, could help other farmers find the balance between old wisdom and new tools. "We're going to need a new ledger," Jake said finally, "one that can hold both kinds of knowledge." Catherine smiled, understanding. "I think we can manage that. After all, the best partnerships build on what came before." Above them, a drone hummed past, mapping the property's contours. Jake watched it go, remembering his initial resistance to all this. Sometimes, the hardest part of growth was simply being willing to plant the seeds of change. The anonymous letter sat unopened on Jake's kitchen table, his name scrawled in disguised handwriting across the front. It had appeared in his mailbox that morning, along with the usual bills and farm supply catalogues. He didn't need to open it, to guess its contents. The whispers at May's diner had grown louder over the past 2 weeks. Michael's arrival coincided with Catherine's morning visit to review the sensor data. They made an unlikely trio, his son in a crisp Chicago business suit, Catherine in her practical field wear, and Jake in his usual work clothes. "So this is really happening." Michael picked up one of the soil sensors, turning it over in his hands. "Miller Farm going corporate." "Partnership," Jake corrected, trying to keep his voice even. "Not corporate takeover." "The difference being?" Michael set the sensor down carefully, his gesture too deliberate to be casual. Catherine stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Your father maintains full operational control. We provide technology, resources, and market access. The goal is to create a sustainable model that other family farms can follow." "Very PR-friendly," Michael observed. His eyes fell on the unopened letter. "Though not everyone seems convinced." Jake finally picked up the envelope, tearing it open. The message inside was brief, typed to avoid identification. "Selling out everything your family built. Some heritage, some legacy." Catherine read it over his shoulder, her expression tightening. "We've been getting similar feedback from other communities. Change frightens people." "It should," Michael said, but his tone had shifted from skepticism to something more thoughtful. "Dad, can we walk the property like we used to?" Outside, the morning sun illuminated the changes taking place across the farm. New irrigation systems gleamed alongside weathered fence posts. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping crop patterns. The contrast was stark, but somehow not as jarring as it had first appeared. "Remember when I told you I was leaving for business school?" Michael asked as they reached the old apple trees. "You didn't speak to me for a week." "Wasn't my finest moment," Jake admitted. "No, but I understand it better now." Michael touched one of the gnarled trunks. "You thought I was rejecting all this, choosing ledgers over land, weren't you? I was choosing a different way to build something lasting, just like you are now." Michael turned to face his father. "These sensors, this partnership, it's not what Grandpa would have done, but maybe it's what needs doing." A drone passed overhead, its shadow briefly touching them. Jake thought about the anonymous letter, about the whispers and sideways looks at church, about Sarah's voice in his memory. Sometimes love means dragging a stubborn man into the future. "Your mother," Jake said slowly. "She always said you got her head for business. Maybe she knew something I didn't." Catherine had kept her distance, letting them talk, but now she approached with the tablet. "The morning readings are in. The apple grove's influence on soil moisture extends further than we thought. Your grandfather's choice of location, it was remarkable. He used to say he just listened to what the land told him," Jake remembered. "And now we can help it speak more clearly." Catherine pulled up a detailed analysis. "Michael, with your business background, you might be interested in how we're quantifying these traditional farming practices." As Catherine explained the data, Jake watched his son's expression change from polite interest to genuine engagement. The business major and the farm kid were finding common ground in columns of soil metrics and resource management strategies. The anonymous letter crinkled in Jake's pocket, its accusations fading against the reality before him. The Miller legacy wasn't in doing things exactly as they'd always been done. It was in finding ways to keep the land healthy and productive, generation after generation. "We should show him the spring-fed pond project," Catherine suggested. "The preliminary surveys are promising." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Pond project?" "Long story," Jake said, sharing a brief smile with Catherine. "Involves a dust storm and some very expensive shoes." As they walked toward the pond, Jake felt something shift, like soil finally accepting rain after a long drought. The changes coming to Miller Farm weren't an ending after all. They were just a different kind of beginning. The harvest report lay open on the hood of Jake's truck, its data telling a story even more promising than they'd hoped. 30% increase in yield despite ongoing drought conditions, Catherine read aloud, her finger tracing the charts. Soil moisture. Retention improved by 45% in treated areas. The board's going to love this. Dawn was just breaking over the test fields, where the combination of traditional crop rotation and Agrotech's precision irrigation had worked what seemed like magic. The corn stood tall and proud, defying the dry summer that had withered neighboring farms. "It's not just the numbers," Jake said, running an ear of corn through his fingers. The kernels were full and healthy, the kind of quality he hadn't seen in years. "It's the way everything's working together, like the land itself is breathing." "Easier?" Catherine nodded, understanding. Over the past months, she'd learned to read more than just data. She'd learned to see the subtle signs Jake had grown up knowing. The way morning dew gathered differently on healthy leaves, how the wind moved through strong crops. "The moisture sensors near your grandfather's apple trees," she said, flipping to another page. "They've been instrumental in designing the new irrigation patterns. We're essentially copying what those trees have been doing naturally for decades." Jake smiled. "Guess the old man knew what he was doing after all." A truck pulled up the drive. Michael, making one of his now regular weekend visits. He'd been splitting his time between Chicago and the farm, putting his business degree to work, helping coordinate between Agrotech's corporate side and the practical realities of farming. "Looking good," Michael called out, joining them at the truck. He picked up the harvest report, his eyes quickly finding the key metrics. "Really good. The other test farms in the program aren't seeing results like this. Other farms don't have your father's experience," Catherine said, "or his stubborn insistence on doing things the right way, not just the easy way." The morning sun caught the dew on the new growth, making the fields sparkle. It was the kind of moment that made all the hard work, all the doubts and difficulties worth it. Jake thought about the letter still pinned to his bulletin board, its anonymous criticism fading against the reality of what they'd achieved. "Earl Watson called yesterday," Michael said, still studying the report. "The bank's very interested in our results. Apparently, several other farmers have been asking about the program." "Bill Henderson came by Mays last week," Jake added. "First time he's spoken to me since he sold out to AgriCorp. Asked a lot of questions about how we're managing things." Catherine's eyes lit up with possibility. "That's exactly what we hoped for. This isn't just about saving one farm, it's about creating a model that works for everyone." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The board is discussing expanding the program. They want to use Miller Farm as a training center." Jake looked out over his fields, remembering all the farmers who'd helped him learn his craft over the years. The idea of passing on both old wisdom and new techniques, of helping others find the same balance they discovered here, it felt right. "We'd need to expand the equipment barn," he said finally. "Maybe add a proper classroom space. Can't have people learning about soil composition while sitting on hay bales." Michael and Catherine exchanged surprised looks at his quick acceptance. I thought you'd need more convincing, Catherine admitted. Sarah always said, a blessing isn't really worth having if you keep it to yourself. Jake ran his hand along the harvest report's pages. This here? This is a blessing. Be wrong not to share it. As if to emphasize his point, another truck appeared on the road. Earl Watson's this time, probably coming to see the results for himself. The word was spreading, carried by the same small-town grapevine that had once whispered criticisms. We're breaking new ground here, Catherine said softly. In more ways than one. Jake nodded, watching the sun rise fully over his thriving fields. The harvest report's numbers were impressive, but they didn't tell the whole story. The real success was in finding a way forward that honored the past while embracing the future, in proving that sometimes the best growth came from unlikely partnerships and the courage to try something new. The board meeting minutes made Catherine's hands curl into fists as she read them in Jake's kitchen. Motion to accelerate acquisition of test program properties, concerns about maintaining corporate control, recommendation to standardize all operations. The formal language couldn't disguise the threat to everything they'd built. They want to buy me out. Jake's voice was quiet but firm. He stood at the window, watching the morning fog roll across his flourishing fields. That's what this is about, isn't it? Some of the board members think we're being inefficient. Catherine set the document down, her frustration evident. They don't understand why we're maintaining individual farm operations when we could consolidate everything under central management, like they did with Bill Henderson's place. The bitterness in Jake's tone was something she hadn't heard since those first helicopter meetings. I've spent 3 hours on video calls this morning fighting this. Catherine moved to stand beside him at the window. The Miller Farm model works precisely because it's not standardized, because it combines modern technology with generational knowledge. But they're looking at spreadsheets, not reality. The fog outside was beginning to lift, revealing the careful integration of old and new that made their project special. Solar-powered sensors nestled beside heritage apple trees. Drone-guided irrigation systems followed patterns Jake's grandfather had discovered decades ago. What happens if they overrule you? Jake asked, turning to face her. His eyes held a wariness she thought they'd moved past. They can't, Catherine started, then stopped herself. Honesty had been the foundation of their partnership. They could try, but this is my project, my vision. I'd resign before I let them turn it into another corporate takeover. The conviction in her voice surprised them both. When had this become more than just a business venture? When had Jake's farm, his mission, become so personally important? Michael's arrival interrupted the moment. He took one look at their faces and the board minutes on the table and said, "So you've heard. You knew about this?" Jake asked his son. "I got wind of it last week. Been making some calls of my own." Michael picked up the minutes, scanning them quickly. "The financial sector is watching our results closely. If we can prove this model is more profitable long-term than the corporate consolidation approach, we can prove it," Catherine said firmly. "The harvest data may not be enough." Michael's business school precision cut through her optimism. They need to see scalability, market integration, a clear path to expanding the program. Jake had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that Catherine had learned meant he was wrestling with something important. Finally, he said, "The training center." "What about it?" Catherine asked. "Move it up. Start it now." Jake turned from the window, his expression set. "You said other farmers are interested. Let's show the board what happens when you work with family farms instead of erasing them." Michael was already pulling out his tablet, fingers flying. "We could fast-track the permits, leverage local support. Earl Watson's been asking about hosting a regional farming symposium." "It's risky," Catherine warned. "If we push too fast, and something goes wrong, like getting caught in a dust storm in designer heels." Jake's hint of a smile caught her off guard. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one. The memory of that night hung between them, how a storm's chaos had led to unexpected clarity. Catherine looked down at the board minutes again, seeing them with new eyes. They weren't just fighting to save one farm anymore. They were fighting for a different vision of the future. "I'll need to go back to Chicago," she said. "Make my case directly to the board. Show them what they're really talking about dismantling." "We'll come with you," Michael said. "Dad can speak to the practical aspects. I'll handle the business metrics, and you can remind them why they made you CEO in the first place." Outside, a drone hummed past on its morning survey route, its shadow briefly darkening the kitchen. The fog had fully lifted now, revealing fields that proved innovation didn't have to mean destruction. Progress didn't have to erase the past. "Well," Jake said, picking up the board minutes and deliberately dropping them in his recycling bin, "guess we better get to work. Storms coming or not, crops still need tending." Catherine watched him head out to his morning chores, his shoulders straight and determined. Another kind of storm was gathering, but this time they'd face it together. On ground they'd broken themselves. Catherine stood before Agrotech's board of directors, her presentation ready. But instead of opening with corporate slides, she unrolled Jake's hand-drawn farm plans across the polished conference table. The rough paper, covered in his practical sketches and careful notes, seemed almost defiantly out of place among the sleek laptops and tablets. "This," she said into the startled silence, "is why we're succeeding where traditional corporate farming is failing." The board members leaned forward, squinting at Jake's annotations about soil patterns and water flow, generations of knowledge captured in pencil and ink. In the back of the room, Jake and Michael sat quietly, letting Catherine make their case. "Our sensors confirmed every observation on these plans," she continued. "What Jake Miller's family learned through decades of experience, our technology validated. But more importantly, we learned things from these plans that our sensors missed entirely." She traced a line across the drawings. "Like this natural watershed that 3 generations of Millers helped develop. No satellite would have spotted it. No algorithm would have predicted it. This is the knowledge we're talking about losing with our acquisition strategy." "Impressive folk wisdom," Stuart Chen, the head of operations, cut in, "but hardly scalable. We can't build a modern agricultural company on hand-drawn maps and family traditions." "Actually," Michael stepped forward, tablet in hand, "we can prove otherwise." He projected a series of charts onto the wall. "These are efficiency comparisons between Miller Farm and our fully automated operations. Notice the difference in resource utilization, crop yield, and soil sustainability." The board members shifted uncomfortably as the numbers told their story. Jake's farm was outperforming their corporate models by significant margins. "But the real potential," Catherine pressed her advantage, "is in the training center we're developing. 23 family farms have already enrolled in our pilot program. Earl Watson at First State Bank is backing expansion loans. We're not just saving farms. We're creating a new model of agricultural partnership. The liability issues alone," Stuart began, "are covered," Michael interrupted smoothly. "I've had our legal team draft a framework that protects both corporate interests and farmer autonomy. We're not asking you to choose between tradition and progress. We're showing you how to profit from both." Jake stood then, his weathered presence commanding attention even in this sterile corporate setting. "Folks, I was probably the biggest skeptic when Ms. Whitmore here first proposed this partnership. Thought it was just another way to push old-timers like me out of the picture. But what we've built," he gestured to his plans on the table, "it's not about old versus new. It's about respect for the land, for knowledge, for each other." The board chairman Davis studied Jake thoughtfully. "You're asking us to fundamentally change our business model, Ms. Whitmore, to take on significant risk based on one successful test case." "No," Catherine said firmly. "I'm showing you how to evolve it. The dust storm that brought me to Miller Farm. It taught me that sometimes our biggest opportunities come disguised as disasters. We can keep buying up family farms, erasing generations of knowledge, or we can create partnerships that make us all stronger." She laid out the final projections, cost analyses, growth potential, market response. The numbers were compelling, but it was Jake's farm plans that kept drawing the board's attention. The careful detail, the deep understanding of the land, it stood as testament to what they might lose in blind pursuit of standardization. The discussion lasted hours. Questions were raised, concerns addressed, compromises proposed. Through it all, Catherine felt Jake's steady presence behind her, grounding her just as his farm had grounded her that stormy night. Finally, Davis called for a vote. The moment stretched like a drought-strained summer. Then, one by one, hands raised in approval. "Your pilot program is authorized for expansion," Davis announced, "with quarterly reviews and careful oversight." Outside the corporate tower, Chicago's afternoon sun caught the glass and steel like a different kind of harvest. Jake carefully rolled up his farm plans, his hands sure and steady as ever. "Guess these old drawings are part of company records now," he said with a slight smile. Catherine watched him tuck the plans away. "They're part of our future," she corrected. "Just like everything else we're building together." The word "together" hung in the air between them, carrying more meaning than either was ready to examine. But like seeds planted in well-tended soil, some things grew in their own time. The banner stretched across Miller Farm's entrance read, "First Annual Heritage and Innovation Harvest Festival," its letters bright against the autumn sky. Below, a steady stream of trucks and cars wound their way up the gravel drive, kicking up dust that glowed golden in the morning light. Jake stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, watching the arrival of neighboring farmers, corporate representatives, and curious locals. The scene before him would have been unimaginable just months ago. Agrotech drones hovering alongside traditional weather vanes, suits mingling with coveralls, old wisdom meeting new technology. "Quite a turnout," Catherine said, joining him with her own coffee. She'd been up since dawn, coordinating with the demonstration teams, but somehow still looked fresh and focused. Bill Henderson just arrived with 3 other farmers from the corporate program. "They're interested in transitioning to our model." Jake nodded, hiding a smile. Amazing what a successful harvest can do to change minds. The festival had been Michael's idea, a way to showcase their results and launch the training center properly. The old equipment barn had been converted into a comfortable classroom space, though Jake had insisted on keeping some of the original features. "Character," he'd called it, "reminder of where we started." "Dad!" Michael waved from the registration table he'd set up near the demonstration field. "Earl Watson's group is here. They want to start with the soil management tour." Catherine touched Jake's arm lightly, ready to show them how it's done. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, sending warmth that had nothing to do with coffee through his chest. These moments had been happening more frequently lately. Small gestures, shared glances, words carrying deeper meanings. Neither of them had addressed it directly, too focused on building their professional partnership to acknowledge what else might be growing. The morning passed in a blur of demonstrations and discussions. Jake led groups through the fields, showing how traditional farming practices worked in harmony with Agrotech's innovations. Catherine handled the technical presentations, explaining how their integrated approach had produced yields that exceeded both old and new methods alone. "The key," Jake explained to a group of attentive farmers, "is understanding that we're not replacing experience with technology. We're using each to strengthen the other." He demonstrated how the soil sensors confirmed patterns his father had documented decades ago, and how that knowledge helped them place the sensors more effectively. Near the apple trees, May had set up a refreshment stand, serving pie and coffee to the gathered crowd. The trees were heavy with fruit, their success a testament to generations of care, combined with modern irrigation techniques. "Remember when you thought all this technology would ruin your farm?" May teased as Jake passed by. "Now look at you, teaching corporate types about soil composition like you were born to it." "Had a good teacher," Jake said, glancing at Catherine across the field. She was deep in conversation with a group of bankers, her tablet displaying their latest results. The morning sun caught her hair, and for a moment he was back in that dust storm, making a choice that would change everything. The festivals. Success exceeded even Michael's careful projections. By afternoon, 15 more farms had enrolled in their training program. Earl Watson announced a special financing package for farmers wanting to adopt their integrated approach. Even Stuart Chen from the board admitted that seeing the results firsthand was enlightening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the flourishing fields, the crowd thinned to just family and close friends. May insisted on serving a special dinner in the converted barn, her way of marking the occasion. "A toast," Michael proposed, raising his glass, "to old wisdom and new ways, to partnerships that work." His eyes moved meaningfully between his father and Catherine, and to whatever comes next. The banner fluttered in the evening breeze, its message a promise kept. Jake looked around the table at the unlikely family they'd built. His son, finally finding his place in the family legacy. May, who'd believed in them even when others doubted. Earl, now a staunch advocate for their program. And Catherine, who'd turned a storm into a beginning. Catherine caught his eye and smiled, a private expression that spoke of more than business success. The harvest hadn't just been about crops, it had been about growing something neither of them had expected to find. The marriage license application sat untouched between them on Jake's kitchen table, its official letterhead stark against the worn wood. Outside, the spring planting was in full swing. A harmonious dance of traditional equipment and modern technology, preparing the earth for another season. "You know," Catherine said, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I first came to this farm, I was wearing an evening gown and running from a dust storm." She smiled, remembering. "Now I'm wearing work boots and helping with soil samples. Life has a way of surprising you." Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. His calloused fingers were gentle against her skin, a touch that had become as familiar as the rhythm of their days together. "You surprised me," he admitted. "Thought you were just another corporate type coming to tell me how wrong I was about everything." "And you surprised me," Catherine countered. "I thought I knew everything about modern farming. Turned out I had to get lost to find what I was really looking for." The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the simple engagement. Ring on Catherine's finger, a band that matched the curves of the hills visible from the kitchen window. She'd insisted on something that wouldn't get in the way of her work in the fields. "CEO or not," she'd said. "I'm a farmer now too." Michael's arrival interrupted their moment, his tablet already displaying the day's data from the training center. He paused at the sight of the application, breaking into a broad grin. "Finally doing the paperwork, huh?" "Your father insisted on asking properly," Catherine said, her eyes twinkling, "even though I practically live here already." "Sarah would have liked you," Michael said suddenly, surprising them both. "She always said Dad needed someone who could challenge him and support him at the same time." Jake's hand tightened on Catherine's, emotion making his voice rough. She would have loved seeing all this, the farm thriving, the training center, you finding your way home. "Speaking of the training center," Michael said, giving his father a moment to compose himself, "we've got 3 new families starting next week. Bill Henderson's been singing our praises to everyone who'll listen. Says the corporate approach nearly broke his spirit, but our program gave him hope again." Catherine nodded, her business instincts engaging even as her thumb stroked Jake's palm. "The latest data from the pilot farms is extraordinary. We're seeing consistent improvements across all metrics: yield, sustainability, resource management. The board's talking about expanding to other states." "Let me guess," Jake said dryly, "more helicopter meetings?" "Only if you promise to rescue any lost executives wandering through your cornfields," Catherine laughed. Then, more seriously, "we're creating something unique here. A way to keep family farms alive while embracing the future. A path forward that honors the past." Jake stood, drawing her up with him. Through the window, they could see the spring planting in progress, drones mapping soil conditions, while Jake's traditional knowledge guided their placement. The old and the new, working in harmony. "Been thinking," he said slowly, "about what my grandfather used to say about farming being a promise to the future. Maybe that's what we're really doing here. Keeping that promise, just in a different way than he imagined." Catherine leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. "A promise worth keeping," she agreed. "Worth building on." Michael picked up the marriage license application, his expression thoughtful. "You know, this is more than just paperwork. It's like what we've done with the farm, bringing different worlds together, creating something stronger." "Poetry from my practical son," Jake teased. "Business school teach you that?" "No," Michael grinned. "Learned it from watching you two. The way you argued about sensor placement and irrigation schedules, but always found a way to make both perspectives work. The way you taught each other to see farming through new eyes." Catherine reached for a pen, her movement decisive. "Well then, let's make it official. After all," she added with a smile, "I've already invested quite heavily in this partnership." "The lost shoes?" Jake asked innocently. "The lost heart," she corrected softly, signing her name with the same confidence she brought to corporate. "Contracts." The morning light filled the kitchen, warming the paper that would formally join their lives as thoroughly as the farm had already united their purposes. Outside, another growing season was beginning, full of promise and possibility. Some crops, after all, took time to reach their full harvest. The wedding reception was held in the converted barn, now a space that seamlessly blended rustic charm with modern amenities. The old family photo album had been placed on a special table near the entrance, its pages open to show the farm's journey. Through generations, next to the weathered photographs of Jake's ancestors, a new picture showed the current day. Jake and Catherine, standing in their work clothes beside the spring-fed pond, her in boots that were decidedly more practical than the lost designer heels from that fateful night. May had outdone herself with the catering, insisting on handling everything despite the offered corporate alternatives. "Some things," she'd declared, "need a personal touch." The smell of her famous apple pies, made with fruit from the grandfathers. Trees, mingled with the evening air drifting through the open barn doors. "Look at this one," Michael said, carefully turning a page in the album. The photograph showed his father as a young man, standing proud beside his first harvest. Same determination, different era. Catherine, elegant in a simple cream dress that somehow didn't show the dust from her morning inspection of the fields, leaned in to study the image. "He hasn't changed that much," she said softly. "Still the same passion for the land." "Neither have you," Jake's voice came from behind them. "Still the same sharp mind that saw possibility where others saw problems." He joined them at the album, his suit a comfortable compromise between farmer and businessman. "Though you've gotten better at checking weather reports before road trips." The gathered crowd was as diverse as their partnership. Farmers in their Sunday best, corporate executives who'd flown in for the occasion, local bankers and agricultural officials who'd supported their program. Earl Watson was deep in conversation with Stuart Chen about expanding the financing options for farms, transitioning to their integrated model. Bill Henderson stood near the drone display, explaining to a group of interested farmers how the technology complemented rather than replaced traditional knowledge. "See, the sensors confirm what we already knew in our bones," he was saying, "but they help us be more precise, more efficient." The album's newest section showed the transformation of Miller Farm, the installation of the first sensors, the successful harvests, the launch of the training center, and throughout the photos, the subtle evolution of Jake and Catherine's relationship, from cautious partners to something deeper. "Remember when you fought against every piece of technology we introduced?" Catherine teased, turning to a page that showed Jake scowling at a soil sensor. "Remember when you thought corporate efficiency was more important than generations of experience?" he countered, pulling her close. Michael shook his head, amused. Remember when you both thought you were just working on a business partnership? A comfortable silence fell between them as they studied the photos. Through the barn's open doors, they could see the evening sun gilding their fields, where traditional farmland and modern agriculture had found harmony. Drones were finishing their evening survey, their quiet hum a counterpoint to the cricket songs beginning in the grass. "Your mother would have loved all this," May said, joining them with fresh coffee. "She always said the farm needed to grow in new ways." She pointed to a photo of Sarah in the album, her smile bright and knowing. "She'd be so proud of how you've all carried her vision forward." The evening deepened into celebration, the barn filled with laughter and conversation about future plans. The training program was expanding to 3 new states, each adaptation building on the success they'd proven possible. But more than the business triumph, it was the sense of community that filled the space, the understanding that they'd found a way to preserve something precious while embracing necessary change. Later, as the party wound down, Jake and Catherine stood in the barn doorway, watching the last light fade over their land. The photo album lay closed behind them, but its story was still being written. "So," Catherine said, her head resting on his shoulder, "ready for the next chapter?" Jake looked out at the fields where his grandfather had first broken ground, where his father had taught him to read the land's moods, where Sarah had helped him learn to adapt. Now those same fields were teaching new lessons about balance, about finding strength in unlikely combinations. "You know what my grandfather would say about all this?" he asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "What's that?" "Sometimes the best crop is the one you didn't plan to grow." The stars were beginning to emerge, their ancient light shining down on senses and soil alike. In the morning, they'd be back to work, building their shared vision. But for now, they simply stood together, watching nightfall on the farm that had brought them home. The glossy educational program brochure lay open on the training center's main desk. Miller Farm Institute, bridging tradition and innovation. Inside, photographs showed farmers of all ages learning to integrate cutting-edge technology with time-tested wisdom. The Institute's mission statement, carefully crafted to reflect both Catherine's corporate precision and Jake's practical insight, read, "Preserving agricultural heritage through technological partnership." "Your grandfather would never believe this," Michael said, watching the latest group of students file in for morning sessions. Farmers flying in from 3 states to learn how to use soil sensors and GPS mapping alongside traditional crop rotation. Jake adjusted the antique barometer his grandfather had used to predict weather patterns, now mounted beside a wall of digital monitoring screens. "Oh, I don't know. He was always saying farming had to look forward and back at the same time, like walking a field, one eye on your feet, one on the horizon." Catherine entered from her morning rounds, tablet in hand but boots dusty from the fields. Marriage hadn't changed their hands-on approach. If anything, it had deepened their commitment to maintaining that crucial balance between boardroom and barnyard. "The new satellite data is impressive," she announced, pulling up charts. "The farms that have completed our program are showing sustained improvement across all metrics. Even the board's skeptics can't argue with these results." The morning sun streamed through windows that had once been barn doors, illuminating the careful blend of old and new in the teaching space. Original timber beams supported modern lighting systems. Traditional farm implements shared wall space with interactive displays. Even the students reflected this fusion. Young, tech-savvy farmers sat beside weathered veterans, each learning from the other. "Did you see today's enrollment numbers?" Michael asked, handing over the latest report. "We're going to need to expand again. Earl's already talking about funding options for a second classroom building." Jake smiled, remembering the bank's initial skepticism. Now Earl Watson was their biggest advocate, having seen firsthand how the program was revitalizing struggling family farms across the region. The latest brochure featured a quote from him. "This isn't just about saving farms, it's about evolving them." Through the windows, they could see Bill Henderson leading a field demonstration, showing a group how drone mapping could enhance traditional planting wisdom. The same man who'd once sold his farm to corporate interests was now helping others find a better way forward. It's more than just the technology, Catherine observed, watching the interaction. We're preserving something precious, generations of agricultural knowledge that could have been lost. Every farmer who comes through here adds to that knowledge. Bete makes it richer. She pulled up another screen on her tablet, showing the Institute's growing database. Alongside the technical data and scientific analysis were recorded interviews with experienced farmers, their insights about land and weather patterns carefully preserved for future generations. Remember when we thought this was just about saving? On farm? Jake asked, sliding an arm around her waist. The gold of his wedding band caught the morning light, matching the golden waves of ripening wheat visible through the windows. Funny how things grow, Catherine agreed, leaning into him. Rather like that mysterious watershed your grandfather developed. Start with one good idea, nurture it properly, and it spreads, Michael finished, grinning. Speaking of spreading, wait until you see the latest application numbers. We've got inquiries from as far away as Canada. The brochure's final page showed a sunset shot of Miller Farm, modern wind turbines silhouetted against the sky alongside the original barn. The tagline beneath read, "Growing tomorrow's farms today." It was more than marketing. It was a promise. They worked to keep every day. A buzz of excitement from the classroom drew their attention. Today's lesson involved using historical rainfall patterns documented by previous generations to optimize modern irrigation systems. The students were gathered around one of the interactive displays, elderly farmers pointing out weather signs they'd learned from their own parents, while younger ones showed how to track those same patterns using satellite data. You know what? This really is, Jake said softly, watching the exchange of knowledge. This is my grandfather's promise to the future, just playing out differently than he imagined. Every farmer who learns here, who takes these ideas back to their own land. They're part of that promise now. Catherine squeezed his hand, understanding. The Institute had become more than a training center. It was a bridge between past and future, a way of ensuring that progress didn't mean forgetting where they'd come from. In the distance, the morning drone survey hummed past the ancient apple trees, their branches heavy with fruit. Some roots, it seemed, only grew stronger with time. The sunrise photo captured the moment perfectly, golden light breaking over Miller Farm, where morning dew caught the early rays and turned both ancient apple trees and modern sensors into beacons of promise. Catherine had taken the picture on their first anniversary, and now it held a place of honor in both their home and the Institute's welcome center. Jake stood in his grandfather's favorite spot, watching another dawn paint the sky. Behind him, the farm was stirring to life. Students arriving for early classes, drones beginning their morning surveys, Catherine's car turning up the drive after her weekly board meeting in the city. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. She'd learned to gauge these moments when he needed to ground himself in the land's rhythms before facing the day's challenges. "Just thinking about that first storm," he said, taking a cup. "How sometimes the best things in life come at you sideways when you're not looking for them." Catherine smiled, remembering her ruined evening dress and lost shoes. Like a corporate executive stumbling through your cornfield. Like finding out progress doesn't have to mean losing your roots. He gestured at their thriving fields where traditional wisdom and modern innovation had created something greater than the sum of its parts. The morning light caught the Institute's solar panels, now powering both the training center and the farm's operations. Below them, the spring-fed pond that had first sparked their partnership reflected the dawn sky. New irrigation channels, guided by both sensor data and generations of Miller family knowledge, carried its life-giving water across the property. Michael's car joined Catherine's in the drive. Their son had finally found his place, splitting time between managing the institutes business operations and working the land himself. He'd discovered that his business degree and farming heritage weren't opposing forces, but complementary strengths. "Earl called last night," Catherine said, sipping her coffee. "3 more banks have signed on to support program expansion. We're helping more family farms than we ever dreamed possible." Jake nodded, thinking of all the farmers who'd come through their doors, some skeptical, some desperate, all looking for a way to preserve their heritage while embracing the future. "You know what Sarah would say about all this?" "What's that?" "She'd say, sometimes love means dragging a stubborn man into the future." His voice was warm with memory and gratitude. She'd have loved seeing her words prove true in so many ways. The sun cleared the horizon fully, lighting up the farm like a promise kept. In the distance, the first students were gathering for morning field training. Above them, a drone hummed past the weather-beaten barometer that had guided 4 generations. "Of millers, ready to start another day?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. Jake Miller took his wife's hand, feeling the strength of roots grown deep and wings spread wide. Together, they walked toward the growing light, where past and future met on common ground, and hope sprouted as naturally as seeds in well-tended soil.